Hello and welcome to this edition of Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Jean-Emile Jameen. Coming up on the show, candidates make one last appeal for votes on the campaign trail ahead of Wednesday's crunch elections in the DRC. President Felix Tshisekedi is seeking a second term, but he's being pushed hard by three others for the top job. Then an explosion at Guinea's main oil terminal in Conakry kills 13, while injuring scores more. The fire has been largely contained, but concerns over fuel shortages have prompted residents to besiege gas stations nearby. And on International Migrants Day, we take a look at the situation in Tunisia, where NGOs report daily abuses for thousands of refugees fleeing their sub-Saharan homelands. Final election rallies have taken place across the DRC on Monday following a tense campaign, but one which has passed calmly. The only question of concern is whether the vote can be organised on time. 44 million people are registered for Wednesday's presidential, parliamentary, provincial and municipal votes. The president will be decided on the basis of first past the post. From Kinshasa, Andrew Hilliard takes a look at the four main candidates.
Last day of election campaigning here in Democratic Republic of Congo ahead of Wednesday's vote. President Felix Tshisekedi holding a final campaign rally here in the capital, Kinshasa, hoping to be re-elected. Now, the main opposition candidates running against him, first of all, Martin Fayulu. He's a former oil executive. This is his second time running for the presidency. The first time he ran, of course, was back in 2018, a notorious election. Fayulu claiming victory in that election, claiming that it was stolen from him. He's maintained a very hard line against the government since then. Of course, those claims denied by President Tshisekedi. Also running Moise Katumbi, the former governor of Katanga province, Democratic Republic of Congo's richest province. Now, Katumbi is one of the country's most powerful men, believed to have made his fortune in mining. But perhaps the best known opposition candidate, at least in the international community, is Denis Mukwege, a man who won the Nobel Peace Prize, a gynecologist known mainly for his work fighting against the use of rape as a weapon in war-torn eastern parts of the country. Now, there were rumours that Mukwege would withdraw himself from the race and throw his support behind one of the other main opposition candidates, but at midday on Monday, his campaign team confirmed that Mukwege would indeed be competing on Wednesday in the presidential election.
Well, so-called small candidates are also trying to make their mark on the political scene in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where American-style campaigns take place. Sometimes they're without means, sometimes without supporters. Nonetheless, they've launched themselves as presidential options. But it's a strenuous process, even for the most ardent of hopefuls. Aurélie Bazara-Kibangula and Emmett Livingston report.
They are singing chants of encouragement. These political activists support Joëlle Billet, a civil society figure. To wage her campaign, she has decided to enlist their help.
It's you who will give me courage.
This is a far cry from the gigantic rallies held by the leading candidates. Joëlle Billet doesn't have the same financial means, and she has no choice but to run her campaign differently. So she relies on these volunteers to spread her message.
Every activist, every supporter who wants to come spends a minimum of $20. I advocate the republic of values, the establishment of values, and I'd like there to be political maturity without incentives.
She had decided to run for president for the first time, but in the end, because of difficulties running her own campaign, Billet rallied behind the incumbent president Felix Tshisekedi, who is running for a second term. A few kilometers away, Rex Kazadi is organising his last days of campaigning in a garage by the roadside.
You're not doing it right. Put it back right.
His strategy is to spread his message by deploying caravans on the streets of Kinshasa.
Having a 40-ton truck with people in it in the city, we're going to have 2 or 3 of them all day long, so we're going to get noticed. We make do with the means at hand.
He doesn't have huge financial resources either. For campaigning, the biggest expenses are the meetings, leaflets and travel. Costs quickly ramp up in a country spanning 2.3 million square kilometres with little to no road infrastructure. So Kazadi relies on family savings and donations to get by as best he can.
This is a democracy for people who can afford it. You'll notice that the people who you hear talking a lot are the ones who've put a lot of cash into these elections. And that doesn't mean they're the most competent.
Up against better-funded favourites, these candidates know it will be difficult for them to make their mark, especially since the law sets no spending limits for election campaigns. Experts estimate that candidates need to raise at least $5 million to organise rallies in the Democratic Republic of Congo's 26 provinces.
13 people have been killed and scores injured after a powerful explosion at a fuel storage facility in Guinea's capital, Conakry. The incident happened around midnight at the state oil company's main reserves near the city's port. Our regional correspondent Sam Bradpiece brings us the details.
A blood donation centre has been hurriedly set up on the forecourt of Conakry's Grand Mosque. Volunteers have gathered here to help those injured by the explosion in the early hours of Monday morning. Salimatu rushed down to offer her support.
This is all about solidarity, which is part of our national motto. Everyone is mobilized to help.
Sit down on that chair there. We'll take the other one.
The team hopes to be able to process the blood collected within a day, after which it can be used for transfusions for the wounded.
The demand is enormous. We're currently asking everywhere for help. There are people who come to help our Guinean brothers. You can see that it's already full.
Thick smoke remained visible even by the afternoon. In Coranty, the closest neighbourhood to the site of the blast, residents are still in shock.
In my room, everything is destroyed.
The blast was felt several kilometres away, breaking windows and shaking buildings. This pharmacy was left in a terrible state.
Look, everything's ruined. The windows, everything. We haven't been able to sleep. One of my colleagues has been injured since yesterday. He was upstairs and a window exploded on top of him.
The injured have flooded into the two main hospitals in the centre of town. Officials say they are up to the challenge.
All medical staff are mobilized and have had resources made available to them. I'm specifying that all treatment will be completely free.
The cause of the fire remains unknown.
On International Migrants Day, we turn now to the unfolding situation in Tunisia, where migrants and refugees face daily institutional violence. That's according to the World Organization Against Torture. The Geneva-based rights group says those fleeing the continent face unprecedented levels of arbitrary arrests, forced displacements and expulsions. It comes in a country which has seen 70,000 journeys stopped just this year. Lilia Blaise and Fadi Ali Riza with this report.
Outside the southern city of Sfax in Tunisia, hundreds of migrants are living in makeshift camps in the middle of olive groves. Under a downpour, some accept to tell us about their daily struggles.
There are many nationalities represented here. Mali, Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, Guinea. We gathered to leave for Italy.
This region is known for being the main area for irregular crossings to Italy. But in recent months, Tunisian authorities have tightened police controls. Many migrants were kicked out of downtown Sfax after a crackdown in September. Nadej, an Ivorian citizen, was one of them. She takes us to her tent.
It's leaking everywhere, everywhere. We have a problem with our sleeping area. They refuse to give us shelter, so we have to come here for refuge.
Since the president gave a sharp speech against black migrants in February, these migrants haven't been able to rent houses or find work. Many were forced to live on the streets, like here in the capital, where some Sudanese migrants have been staying in this park for 2 months.
Come and see. We do the dishes next to the trash. Here's where people shower. Mosquitoes everywhere. No one's safe from disease.
Many are registered as asylum seekers with the United Nations Refugee Agency in Tunisia, but non-profit organizations, alongside UN agencies, have not responded to most of the humanitarian requests. For Phillips, it's a huge disappointment.
Our main fear is to be arrested and driven back to the Algerian and Libyan borders. It already happened to some of us here. We thought we were coming to a country that's safe, a country with laws that will protect you, that might let you live a dignified life.
Between the months of July and August, around 1,500 migrants were forcibly transferred out of Tunisia. Nonetheless, this decision has not stopped the flow of migration from the Libyan and Algerian borders.
It's a landslide victory which most would have predicted. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has won a third term with almost 90% of the votes. It allows him to stay in power until 2030. With Egypt's economy on the brink and with the war in Gaza on its doorstep, challenging times are ahead for Sisi and for Egyptians. Edouard Cousin reports from Cairo.
As expected, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi secured a third presidential term in the elections in Egypt. Soon after the announcement, traditional Egyptian sailing boats were moving up and down the Nile with large portraits of Sisi in their sails. Pro-Sisi groups were handing out posters of Sisi for their supporters to put on their cars while waving Egypt flags. Stages were set up across the city for people to celebrate. And at night in the city center, fireworks were heard. It felt like a big Sisi show. And for many Egyptians, that was also what this election was. It was an election of which the results were known beforehand. But beyond the show of celebration, many Egyptians are not happy with where Egypt stands after a decade of Sisi's rule. The economy is in crisis. Food prices are skyrocketing. The value of the Egyptian pound has plummeted. And currently, Egypt is in talks with the IMF for a new loan agreement, which would most certainly come with the condition of new harsh austerity measures. And then there's the war in Gaza. There are big fears of a mass expulsion of Palestinians out of Gaza into Egypt. This is something that would certainly anger Egyptians and would put pressure on Sisi. Sisi has strongly rejected such calls for the resettlement of Palestinians, but with Egypt's international debt piling up, his position is vulnerable.
Finally, a story that's been making the rounds from Sunday. South African paramedic Gerco van Deventer was released on Sunday, having been held by jihadists in Mali for over 6 years. The 48-year-old was kidnapped in Libya back in November 2017 on his way to Tripoli. Our correspondent in South Africa, Eunice Masson, has the details.
Van Deventer has been released unconditionally 6 years after being kidnapped and sold to a splinter group of Al-Qaeda in Mali. He is expected to be in good health, but also needs to undergo a standard medical examination in Algeria before he returns to South Africa in the next few days. France 24 spoke to the aid organization's Gift of the Givers, who were facilitating negotiations for his release.
But from past videos and past experience from other hostages that have come out from Al-Qaeda, generally they've always been in good health from a physical point of view. From an emotional and psychological point of view, everybody is not the same. Some have adapted very well. Some have looked forward to go back to the area. They got used to the terrain and the country itself. And others took a little longer to connect with family members. So it's not the same for every hostage. In Gerco's case, every video that he made, he looked very well physically. But at some point, we know they allowed him to phone his wife, which is very, very unusual. I've been dealing with hostages since 2013. I've never heard of any time the hostage was allowed to phone a family member. And this is the first time in that period of time that I've heard something like that.
Experts say that Van Deventer, who is a paramedic, received special treatment for the fact that he could offer medical assistance. But details surrounding his captivity will become clear once he has returned to South Africa.
That's all the news from across the continent so far, but there's more coming up here on France 24.